Here's 4 ways you're probably messing up your deadlift from the floor. The first way is people's shoulders will move forward off the floor. As soon as the barbell leaves the ground, a very common issue a lot of lifters will have, and this will be in combination with other errors you will see later in the video, but the first is shoulders will move forward in front of the barbell. This is a problem typically because when this happens, this usually means that the barbell is dragging you forward, and as a result, you're obviously not going to be able to apply the most vertical forces both up and down into the ground. You're not going to be able to push into the ground as well. You're not going to be able to pull vertically as well. Because that barbell is going to be pulling you forward, you're going to have to start applying forces to pull that barbell back into you, which of course is really inefficient, and barbells are heavy enough when you're going for a heavy deadlift that you don't need to make it any harder for yourself. So those shoulders moving forward usually means that the barbell is moving you forward, and as a result you need to fight it in the opposite direction, which is not what we need. This could be for a couple of reasons. Generally, this is one, from not being aware of this happening. A lot of times people pull, this typically happens and people are blissfully unaware that their shoulders are being pulled forward. Oftentimes people will start with their shoulders too far in front of the barbell, and then as the barbell starts pulling forward, their shoulders move further in front. What can also happen is people sit too far back behind the barbell, and then when you start lifting the barbell off the floor, the shoulders need to swing forward in front, but we overshoot it and end up with the shoulders in front of the barbell again, thus resulting in that being pulled forward. So what we want to do here is make sure that we're pretty much on top of the barbell when it leaves the floor. In that start position, we're making sure that the barbell is nice and vertical underneath our shoulders, in the conventional deadlift at least, and then we make sure that we try to maintain that quite well for the initial separation from the floor. The second most common mistake we typically see people making is bumping the barbell away off the floor. This is incredibly common, and it has the same issue as the shoulders moving in front of the barbell. We're adding forward momentum to the barbell, and this then requires us to try and pull that barbell back towards us, but often this is very, very hard because if we've added this momentum as the barbell is leaving the floor, we've got that barbell moving away from us, then we need to apply force to move it back towards us. So again, we're adding an opposing force. We're making that barbell essentially heavier by pushing it away from us with speed. Bumping that barbell off the floor is not what we want. This can come from a couple of different issues. It can come from the barbell starting too close to you. It can come from your dynamic start being incorrect. So where you start the barbell, you can often have an issue that as you swing your hips down into the barbell, or as you come up from the bottom, however you start your dynamic start, that you bump that barbell away because you're not precisely placing the barbell over your foot correctly, and you're not able to correctly place yourself around the barbell when it's on the floor, so that your dynamic start doesn't bump it away from you. This one is super common. Often these are combination problems, like the first and this problem here. This is something that actually can be a little bit annoying to change. So for example, if that barbell starts too close to you, so as we set up, we're not going to want a vertical shin angle. We're going to want some inclination in our shin angle. So if that barbell is too close to your heel, for example, if it's too close to your shin, when you move down and move your knees forward, your shins move forward, and then you bump that barbell away. So what you need to do here is move that barbell just a little bit further forward along your foot, but then you need to have the discipline to precisely start your dynamic start, and to make sure then that as you set up to lift that barbell off the floor, you're not bumping it away from you. The third issue that we typically see is that back will lose position as soon as the barbell leaves the floor. What we'll often see here is an increase in rounding of the upper back, sometimes the lower back, as soon as that barbell leaves the floor. Now this is often an issue because it plays into issue 1, for example, of the shoulders moving forward. Typically what happens if a lifter is losing that upper back position, we'll often see that torso moving forward. As a result, the barbell is moving away from us, and then we're getting this effect again of that barbell pulling us forward. So what we really need to do here is maintain the back position we want lifting off the floor. For some lifters, this might be a huge amount of extension. For some lifters, this might be quite a bit of upper back flexion. Generally, the bigger and stronger a lifter is, the more upper back rounding we'll apparently see in the start. But the main thing for anywhere along the spectrum you are is trying to maintain that position as much as possible when it leaves the floor. So we don't want to see a big change in this as the bar is moving. I'm not saying you need to be in perfect extension. I'm not even necessarily you have to have a flat back. But what I am saying is you need to maintain the same, or try and maintain as much as possible, generally in the upper back, the same amount of flexion or extension you have when you set up, because you want to maintain this position because when this upper back flexion or extension moves, we generally see that barbell moving away from us. Typically what causes this is the start position and an incorrect tension applied. So what we'll see is a lot of times lifters will not be able to correctly apply this vertical force into the barbell before the barbell leaves the floor. This used to be known as pulling the slack out of the barbell, but it's not exactly this. It does feel like that, but you may not have slack to pull out of the barbell. What I like to think of it is, imagine someone has put 2 hooks onto your shoulders and they're pulling you as vertically as possible, and you want to apply as much force vertically through your upper body and your arms without bending your arms. Of course, you want to pull those arms straight, pull your chest up. We're not pulling our shoulder blades together, we're just locking our shoulders into a fixed position. And then when you're at this maximum tension, then you pull off the floor. What typically happens is people are just very unaware of what tension they need when they're pulling the barbell off the floor in the deadlift. And then as a result, we're not able to maintain that position when they begin pulling. Lastly, we have the fourth problem, which is really common, and that is the knees moving back too early. This is an issue because we're adding this rearward trajectory of a barbell. We're reducing our leg drive off the floor, which is incredibly important. We want the back pulling and the legs pushing when we're deadlifting. When we want to deadlift heavy, we want to use as much of our body as possible. What often happens here is that, of course, the knees need to move back a little bit when we're pulling off the floor, but what typically happens as soon as the barbell leaves the floor, the knees immediately move back. Now, this is what we want when we're doing a clean or a power clean or a clean pull, but when we're doing a conventional deadlift, when we're trying to deadlift the most weight, we want those knees staying forward for longer. And we actually want to delay those knees coming back until the barbell is very, very close to the knee, and then we don't want to move them back fully. Now, I know what you're thinking. You'll probably see some very good deadlifter doing this in their training. Maybe you might see a strongman doing this. There's a couple of reasons for that. Sometimes when you're just bullshit strong, you can get away with certain aspects. I would argue that there's always a case for improving your technique and improving your efficiency. And a lot of great lifters are always working on their technique. So don't use them as an example. But further to that, the chances are, if you're watching this video, you're probably not an unbelievable freak of nature, so you do need to make your body work for you as much as possible. And even if you are, you still want your body to work for you as much as possible. So watching that knee angle and how it changes as soon as the barbell leaves the floor is really important to keep the leg drive engaged. Now, this isn't quite as simple as just fixing your position. We may need to have stronger legs here. We may need to improve our back squat. We may need to do some belt squats. We may need to do some single leg work. So this isn't necessarily just one we can fix immediately, and it can take quite a bit of work. Now, for all 4 of these problems, sometimes they're a combination of one of each one of these. Sometimes it can be 2 or 3 together. Oftentimes it can be a combination of poor skill and not being strong enough. So it's easy for me to sit here and say, look, these are the technical issues, but it's not quite as easy to go and fix them. Identifying the problem is simple, but a lot of time it needs to be a combination of technical work and it needs to be a combination of strengthening work. So specific areas such as your upper back, your lower back, and your legs, or maybe all 3 of these until you get the correct position. So don't think I'm going to fix this immediately, because as you get the heavier weights, you need to have the requisite strength in certain areas to increase your ability to express your best technique. So simple to identify, harder to fix. So hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, let me know below.